SITREP World Briefing for August 5, 2026. Ukrainian police released video showing a Russian first-person view drone chasing a civilian through a marketplace in Kherson, Ukraine, in an attack that Ukrainian officials described as a deliberate strike on a non-combatant. The man, identified as a 52-year-old vegetable seller, was pursued between stalls before the drone exploded, and he survived the attack. Kherson matters strategically because it sits near the Dnipro River line that has divided Ukrainian-held and Russian-held territory in southern Ukraine since Kyiv retook the city in late 2022, leaving civilians, traders, aid workers, and transport routes exposed to constant surveillance and attack from across the water. In this case, the target was not a military position or supply point, but a street vendor carrying out ordinary work in a public market. The publication of the footage is also significant because it turns a local attack into evidence of a broader method of warfare, one in which remotely piloted munitions can stalk individuals at close range. For residents of Kherson, repeated drone activity has altered basic movement patterns, including trips to markets and work sites, and it has deepened concerns that Russian operators are using cheap, maneuverable aircraft not only for reconnaissance, but also for targeted strikes on civilians. Regional mediators stepped up efforts to restore navigation through the Strait of Hormuz, with Qatar saying the wider region was engaged in trying to stop further escalation and revive free passage through the waterway. Qatari officials said mediation between the United States and Iran was at an advanced stage, while also stressing that no direct talks were underway at this point. The diplomatic push centers on reopening one of the world's most important maritime choke points after the recent war sharply raised the risk of disruption. The Strait of Hormuz links the Persian Gulf to the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, making it a critical artery for global oil and gas shipments and a central strategic concern for Iran, the Gulf monarchies, the United States, and energy importers in Asia and Europe. Because so much seaborne energy trade passes through the narrow channel, even a temporary interruption can quickly affect freight costs, tanker insurance, and benchmark fuel prices worldwide. That is why calls from Doha for a return to free navigation carry weight far beyond the Gulf itself. The current negotiations matter not only for shipping, but also for the balance of power after a conflict that began on February 28th and has drawn in regional governments trying to prevent another military rupture. By emphasizing indirect mediation rather than face-to-face talks, Qatar signaled that the diplomatic track remains fragile, yet still active enough to justify expectations of a possible breakthrough. Any arrangement that restores transit through Hormuz would ease immediate pressure on commercial traffic and could create a narrow opening for broader de-escalation between Tehran and Washington's regional partners. European Union ministers and Spanish officials responded on Tuesday to last week's mass migrant influx into Ceuta, the Spanish enclave on the North African coast, by arguing that the episode did not undermine the Schengen visa-free travel area. Spain's interior minister said after talks with EU counterparts that Schengen was not the problem and had not been compromised. The remarks were meant to frame the crisis as an exceptional border and humanitarian emergency. Spanish authorities were also managing the immediate humanitarian consequences in Ceuta after the large-scale arrival, with most of those estimated 50,000 migrants having already returned to Morocco by Tuesday. The scale and speed of the movement turned Ceuta into a flashpoint involving emergency care, border control, and diplomatic messaging. For Madrid, the challenge was not only to restore order in Ceuta, but also to show other EU governments that Spain's frontier with Morocco could be stabilized without reopening a broader argument over Schengen rules or free movement inside the bloc. The episode has carried significance well beyond Ceuta because the enclave, along with Melilla, forms part of the EU's only land border with Africa, making any sudden movement there a test of both migration policy and relations with Rabat. The event quickly became entangled in a diplomatic row as well as a humanitarian disaster. EU ministers sought to close ranks around Spain's position. If the influx is treated as a one-off shock at a highly exposed frontier, Brussels and Madrid can focus on border management and bilateral diplomacy. sources, and the full written briefing are available at sitrepbrief.com.